Welcome. So today we'll go over the 2025 program grants intake, some highlights of this and key changes that are happening this year. A quick overview of what's included in the presentation. So what's new in 2025, how to apply in 2025. I'm sure some of you know that the process and the platform has changed. Program essentials, so just a little bit about Community Gaming Grants branch as a grant program itself and the services we offer. And we'll cover organization eligibility. So what does your organization, what structural criteria you need to meet to apply, program eligibility, the financial eligibility components, spending the grant, reporting, and some resources. And before we get into it, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm calling in today from the traditional lands of the Lekwungen people, who are known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. I thank them for their stewardship of this land, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to live and work here, connect with my community, and participate in acts of ongoing reconciliation, both through my personal life and definitely through my work. And recognizing that this call is going out to organizations on different traditional lands throughout British Columbia. All right, so what's new in 2025? Let's go over some of the highlights here. There's a lot to cover. Process changes. The online application portal has changed in 2025 to improve the applicant experience. So a couple of changes here. Accessing the application. The new process requires applicants to have a BCE ID to start, and you can use either a business BCE ID or a basic BCE ID account. And we've got more information about that on our website, and happy to answer some questions about the differences there as well. The new application forms are applicant-centric. So what this means is the forms themselves are dynamic. So applicants will see the questions most relevant to their situation. I'll go over that a bit later and also point you to some tutorials that'll help you through that process. Communication changes. So a few more enhancements, live service. So for technical challenges and basic questions, when you phone us, you'll definitely speak with a live agent. We're getting support through Service BC, where we've trained, I think, somewhere upwards of 40 agents to reply to most of our questions. Specific questions about your file at Community Gaming Grants will be forwarded to the branch. That'll include any questions about an application and process, decision letters, follow-up about reporting or other issues identified. Those will come to our staff, and we do have grant analysts available to take your call. It's one person at a time, so if you do get a voicemail, please leave all your details and they will call you back within 48 hours. But you will get a live person answering now. Notification letters as well, so our decision letters are going to be coming from the new grant management platform. So this is a new system, so just a heads up to add this address here, cgg.noreply@gov.bc.ca to your safe list. We're hoping it doesn't get filtered as often as the previous one, which had gaming in the title. And just a reminder to always use the email address that we provide on our website and on our decision letters, which is communitygaminggrants@gov.bc.ca. To communicate with us, check the subject line. If it says do not reply, that means there's no one monitoring the inbox and your email may not be received. So they have these set up to send out decision letters, but not to receive. What else is new in the guidelines? We made some updates to the guidelines for clarity and to address challenges from previous years. So simplified financials, which was brand new last year. And we made a small change to that just to clarify only programs that have been operating for more than a year can provide simplified financials. So this is for if the entire request is 10,000 or less, there's an option for simplified financials. It does have to be for ongoing programs that you've already run for a year. And this option will actually be built into the application form now if you're eligible as well. So the Excel spreadsheet that was on our website is now gone. Other changes, renewed funding. Due to our transition to the new platform, renewed funding is not available in the 2025 intake. It will be coming back again in 2026. Wasn't feasible to roll out a new grant management platform with that kind of a history embedded into it. And the other change, rolling over to a new platform, is we won't be requesting copies of void checks anymore. So new applicants or applicants that have updated their banking information can complete what's called a FIN 312 form. It's the standard government direct deposit form. There's a link in the application. There's a link on our website, all of that. We have done our best to port over payment information for all the organizations that have received a grant payment in the last 12 months. If you didn't apply last year or you didn't get a grant, we're going to be looking to get that direct deposit information with your next application though. So that's kind of it for those changes. How to apply in 2025. So we'll start here. Definitely always check the program eligibility, review our guidelines to make sure your organization and your program is eligible. So it's a good first step. Look at the intake dates. So these are in the Community Gaming Grant Program guidelines. They're also on the website on the Apply Now page. And make sure that you have a BCEID account ready to use to log in with. So if you have a business BCEID, that is recommended. You can have several people in your organization log in under that same profile, have those details ready. If you don't have it and you're a little bit strapped for time, you can go online and get a basic BCEID in a rather short turnaround. Prepare your documents. So you want to make sure that you have all of your documents ready for the application, so your financial statements, program revenue and expenses, if that's applicable, program descriptions, all of that information. I always recommend to have it saved in a folder on your desktop and then go online. So when you complete your application, you'll go to our new Apply Now online service page and you'll click the button. It'll ask, are you applying using a basic BCEID or a business BCEID? And then it will take you to the login screen for that and launch you straight into the application. Have your LNG number ready to retrieve your account information if you are a returning applicant. Throughout the process, you can save your application now. So if you go in and you start and maybe something comes up where you don't have all the documents you thought you needed, you can hit save and come back to it at a later time. So save your progress throughout and then submit your application once it is complete. You can also print a copy for your records at any point, including after it's being submitted. So other things before you apply, I think I mentioned have your licensing and grants or your LNG file number ready. So if you are a returning applicant, you can enter this file number and it'll be used to auto-populate some of the organization's information in the application screen. Have your current mailing address ready. So we're adding new ones into our system. So we're asking all applicants to provide a current mailing address for use. through the application and the reporting process. It can be a different address than your organization's business address if you want. There's options there, so whatever you feel is most pertinent. And then the gaming account. Again, if you have applied within the last 12 months and received funding, you shouldn't need to take any action. If you haven't applied in a year or more, or you didn't get funding, or you're a new applicant, maybe you're coming back to apply after a few years hiatus, you'll need to submit the new direct deposit form, and that will be, it's on our website there as well. So you can use either a void check or a copy of your direct deposit information from the bank. So it's looking for the bank name, institution number, transit number. It's pretty standard. The main difference is we're not making that copy of a voided check mandatory. So if you don't have checks printed, you don't have to order them anymore. All right, we do have some additional resources that we've created to support applicants throughout this new system launch. So we have tutorial videos that will be on our resources, application resources page. I think there is 8 or 9 in total. So you can watch those and it will show you step by step how to go through them. I think they're about 2 minutes each. You can pick and choose which ones you need to watch. Updated pre-application checklists. So it kind of tells you what documents you'll need depending on how you're applying, and frequently asked questions. We've got the link there, so it's on the resources page under application resources. They're very helpful. The tutorial videos are great. If you open it in Google Chrome, it does turn on closed captioning automatically as well. So again, just some tips and advice. Going through this again, checking the guidelines to make sure you're eligible, looking at the checklist, making sure that you're prepared, review example documents if you need. We do have example documents for financials and everything else that we require. You just want a visual. Have a professional review your financials if that's relevant or if it's possible. It's not a requirement, but it can be helpful. Save everything. I think that you can use pretty much any kind of software on this new application portal, but just recommending, Microsoft Suite for simplicity. If relevant, address any of the items from your previous year's notification letter. So definitely take a look at that and make sure that we haven't asked for follow-up on any items. And if we have, that gets addressed. Make sure all your reporting is up to date with us. All of your gaming account summary reports have been submitted. If you need to, sometimes you'll have in your decision letter a referral to contact the outreach manager, that's me, for assistance. Reach out before you submit your application if needed. And then apply as early as possible. Always provide this advice. Applications are processed in the order received. And now, being that you can save your applications, you can go in and start it really early. You can have it saved for weeks if you want to go back and kind of slowly work at it. So you don't have to race the clock all in one go anymore. So we're hoping that makes it easier to get them in a little bit sooner. So I'll go in, talk a bit about community gaming grants as a program itself of the government of BC. So community gaming grants support community-driven programming. We're funded with commercial gaming revenue, so this goes back a long ways, and this kind of pushes the mandate of the program. This is gaming revenue from the communities. So these are for community programs, not for government programs, served by the community for the community, focus on grassroots. So our budget is split up. We have $135 million to go toward our program grants, which we've just highlighted. That's what these are. They're programming grants. And it's to help not-for-profits deliver ongoing programs. So these grants are not competitive. All eligible applicants receive funding at some level. There is about a 90% approval rating for them. I think the average grant in 2023-24 was about $30,000, and we fund approximately 5,000 organizations all across British Columbia. This budget also covers the parent advisory councils, or PACs, and the district PACs as well. So that is a separate intake. They have a different set of guidelines, but it's included in that same $135 million budget. Then starting in 2017, there was an additional $5 million provided that is earmarked for capital projects. So the capital project program helps not-for-profits complete capital projects, such as facility upgrades, acquisitions, infrastructure, things of that nature. And those are typically grants of about $20,000 up to $250,000. Applicants have to have matching funds in place. So this one is more competitive. It is typically oversubscribed by about 3 to 1 every year that it's been out. And again, that one has a separate program guide. Capital project program usually launches in the summer with an intake from June to August. So there'll be future presentations on that in late spring. Funding levels. So the level of funding you can expect is based on the size and the scope that is presented in the application through the program description. Demonstrated financial need is shown in program actual revenues and expenses. Things like how many people have been served or participate in your program are taken into account. Community benefit, things like that. Additional factors also include the overall demand and available funding that we have. So within that $135 million budget, how much funding is available. There is maximum funding levels of $125,000 for local organizations and $250,000 for regional or provincial. Something new in the application forms as well is if you do request more than $125,000, it will pop up with a field asking you if you know that this is regional or provincial, and to include some notes explaining how the program or the organization delivers programming on a regional or provincial basis. And there is notes in the guidelines about what to include there. That business case is just highlighting the pieces. There's information in Appendix 1. So things like, are you the lead organization? Are you a governing body? Are you a leader in your sector? Do you have several locations? Things like that. Just a note that these are maximum levels. Being noted as a regional or provincial organization does not guarantee funding at that highest level. They all start 0 to 125, 0 to 250. There is a reconsideration process for community gaming grants. So if your application is denied and you would like the branch to reconsider their decision, you can file a reconsideration request. This has to be received in writing within 30 days of receiving your decision letter. And currently email is sufficient. It is just an email sent to us with that as the subject line. We're hoping to create an online form for it sometime later in the year. Just watch our website for any changes there. What we ask for is that you address the points in your notification letter that you disagree with. So state the reasons why the decision should be varied or overturned. You can provide clarifying information, brand new information, or if you're missing documents and that was the reason for the decision, is unlikely to be approved or varied on that decision. It's not a do-over. It's a chance to say, sometimes people make mistakes and maybe the grant analyst reviewing your application made an error. or maybe they missed something, or maybe they misunderstood a piece. So it's an opportunity to provide that level of clarification. And then we attempt to get these answers back out to you within 90 days. And I will just note that in the last, I think, 6 months, we have been very far behind that timeline, but we're catching up now with the new manager of reconsideration in place. So if you've been waiting for a reconsideration decision to come back to you, you should be getting it soon, and we should be getting back to that 90-day turnaround starting in the new fiscal. All right, so who can apply for a community gaming grant? What kind of organizations are eligible? So we specifically fund not-for-profit organizations. So you need a primary purpose to operate for a community benefit. Delivering programs or services in your community. You should have an open membership, something reasonably open for anyone in your community to get involved and participate, contribute if they want. Having a volunteer board of directors that is elected by the voting membership. Democratically chosen. At least 2/3 of that board has to live in BC, and they can't receive remuneration for their role on the board. If they have another separate role, say your secretary is also a program manager, it's very separate than their governance role. That's another story, that's okay. But for their volunteer position on the board. And then more than double the number of voting members to board members is just a policy in place to ensure that there's a democratic process. If you have the same 10 people elect themselves every year, it's not really democratic. If there is a rational connection between the primary purpose of an organization and a restriction on membership or a restriction on who can be on the board, we may consider that. There is also a place in the new application forms where you can provide that information to us. So maybe the primary purpose of an organization is to promote the interests and welfare of an identifiable group or class of persons characterized by physical or mental disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and the organization grants a preference to members of the above noted group. There would be a good argument to say there's a rational connection. You want people with lived experience in the work that you're doing on the board. So it is flexible in that way that we can look at reasons for that. Ineligible organizations. So if you're a for-profit organization, member-funded society refers to a legal terminology through BC registries. So if you are an incorporated society and you choose member-funded, you will not be eligible for community gaming grant. It does not mean that you take fees or annual dues from your membership. It means that when you dissolve, you can pay out shares to each of your members. So it's a legal terminology. Have a look at your society paperwork and see if you are or not. We cannot fund any kind of political parties, political action groups, lobby groups, anything like that that's meant to sway government. We also don't fund, as I mentioned, any kind of government. So this is meant to be by community for community. So if you're program of, agent of, any kind of level of federal, provincial, regional, municipal governments, including First Nation governments or other local governments, we cannot fund you. I will say there is a First Nation revenue sharing program to allow BC First Nations to participate and get gambling revenue. It's just separate from this program. So again, any kind of government facility, so healthcare facilities, educational facilities, colleges, universities, libraries, museums, a lot of those are run by the local government. Some museums are not for profit. So have a look at your structure there. Are you government run? Is your board of directors and your membership independent of the government? or are they appointed? Professional and industry associations, we're not able to fund, and religious institutions. Again, for religious institutions, there are several not-for-profit organizations with religious affiliations that meet our eligibility criteria, and they can be funded. It's just the institutions themselves typically don't meet that with the membership and the Democratic Board of Directors. Take a moment here, we'll talk about what kind of programs we fund. So eligible programs. So community gaming grants support a very wide range of unique programs, all kinds of things. So it's hard to say what is eligible. We'll go over what's not in the next slide. But basically, some important things to note is that your applications are submitted on a program basis, so you can apply for one or more programs. And we define a program as an ongoing service, activity, or series of activities. So that's pretty broad, something that's going on in your community that you're making happen. Program delivery, so you have to actually be running the program at the time of application. We don't provide seed funding or startup funds for something new that you want to do. It's not for projects with a fixed start and end date, and it has to be directly delivered by the applicant that's applying. So if you're partnering, there's a handful of different groups or just two that are partnering, decide who is the lead organization. So, and it's typically the group that's handling most of the financials, incurring the expenses and paying those bills. Typically the lead organization. If you're not sure, feel free to reach out, but we can only fund one group for a singular program. So pick that lead group. And then community benefit. We look for this in the program description. Is the program responsive to a community's needs? Right? Is that why this exists? Is there an unmet need in your community that you're responding to? And that's why you started to run the program. They should be accessible and inclusive, so no unnecessary restrictions. Again, if it's aimed at a certain group of people with unmet needs, that is also acceptable. So unnecessary restrictions is what we're saying we don't want to see. And they should provide an immediate direct service to the community. So something is happening. A lot of this, it goes to our use of funds as well, which I'll get into. Having the money spent within 12 months, we like to see something deliverable pretty immediately. So ineligible programs, things we can't fund. If it's delivered on a contract or a funding agreement, that's seen as if you're contracted to deliver someone else's program or you have a funding agreement, whether that's through government or another organization delivering activities on behalf of someone, we can't fund that. Unmet contracted activities. Solely operating a facility or a venue. So again, we know how important a lot of facilities are to running programming. However, we're more interested in what activities are happening inside there. Financial assistance to individuals. So whether it's direct financial assistance or handing out gift cards, things like that, it's really difficult to actually provide grant funding for that to assess the need year to year. And honestly, it's something that we couldn't afford to do anymore with our budget. So that one is not a program that we can fund. Vocational training, career training, job skills, placement, that kind of thing. We can't fund any of that. There is some other really great funding out there from the province, other ministries that aim for that, and Work BC. So go have a look there. We're just not able to cover that. Fundraising or social enterprise programs, we do recognize value, definitely of fundraising and social enterprises, things like thrift stores or canteens, but we're not funding those activities directly. Again, if you're doing these to raise money, we're more interested in what you're raising the money for, what activities are you're doing that you need that financial support for. We want to fund those directly, not indirectly through fundraising. Tangible goods or food to participants. This can touch over on the fundraising or social enterprise side. It can also touch on the financial assistance side. A number of different things. So this was clarified a few years ago. If you're just selling goods or food to people and providing that for sale at a discount or otherwise, it's not eligible. Anytime you're providing something for free to people, like food banks, things like that, that is absolutely fine. Programs that benefit other organizations. So we see this a lot where there is definitely great spillover benefit to the community, but it's indirect. Your program is benefiting other not-for-profits to do the good work that they do, and it's just too indirect for the Community Gaming Grants program. And again, if there's no immediate direct service to the community, so things like research, capacity building, those won't be eligible. If you have got a notification in your decision letter about any of these, I think they've been putting out notice, especially about selling tangible goods and food. You may have got a referral to the outreach manager. Please do contact us well ahead of time before you submit your application so we can help kind of coach you through that process and you know what to do or how to reorganize that to apply. Program description. So describing the program, what the grant analysts are looking for to best understand how the program runs, what the community benefit, what the size and the scope are. It's sort of this who, what, when, where, how. So who is benefiting, right? Who is this aimed at and how many people? Is this a program like a daycare where there's children and there's 25 registered seats available? Is this seniors program and it's drop-in, but the average has been 30 people a month coming? So they're interested in who it's aimed at, how many people, like what are the program activities? What is it that you're doing specifically? So say what it is, when does it run? So how often or what's the frequency? Maybe this is something you do on a weekly basis around year round, or maybe this is a season of sport that runs from April to September and you practice 3 times a week. So that kind of helps us understand that size and scope piece. Where is it delivered? Do you have a facility where you have occupancy costs? Do you have travel? Are you doing it on the go? And how is the program accessible? Let's see, so if programs are delivered less than 12 months, we ask you to include a bit of extra information. How do you plan for the ongoing delivery? So just demonstrating some viability and capacity to deliver the program, that you've thought these things through and you have a plan in place. And then also address what the identified need is in the community. So if it's a new program, why did you start it? So we will look at these programs that haven't run for a full year. We're just wanting a better understanding of why they're being introduced and to make sure that they'll continue. So new in 2025, there are dedicated fields within the application form to provide the specific information the grant analysts are looking for. So just putting it out there, please just read the questions, answer to the best of your ability. If you have statistics, great, provide those where it's relevant, if they're available, and avoid technical information or industry-specific jargon. The too much information can sometimes go over the reviewer's head, so you really want to stick to the questions that are asked. Sort of like an elevator pitch. If you're telling somebody about what you do and you're going up 10 floors, how would you get that across to them? So now with defining the program. So program selection. The new forms will dynamically update based on your selection. So one of the first things it'll ask you is how many programs are you applying for? Are you applying for one or several programs? So you should know this before you complete that section of the application form. And there's a few different selections, a few different options that I'll go over with you next. And some of this will be a bit new for applicants. So one of those options is one overall program. This would mean that the program is equal to the entire operations of the organization. You only do one thing. All of the activities are eligible for funding and they all serve the same overall purpose. One distinct program, so the funding request is for a single distinct program within your overall operations. So you might do other things, but you're just applying for one, your main program, or there's multiple. So the funding request could be for several distinct programs. And I believe the form allows up to 10 programs, which looking back in our history, I think we look back 10 years, we've never had more than 10 programs included. So based on your selections and the initial information selected, the form is going to guide you down the correct pathway and prompting you for the required financial and descriptive information. So if your program has been operating for a full year and the total requested amount of all programs is less than $10,000, the option of using simplified program of financials will be available to you, and that will be embedded within the form. The option will not be presented if you don't qualify. So here's example one. Organization's entire operations are one eligible program. So in this example, there's Sunshine Sports Society, and they have the sport ball program. So this program could include everything that they do. It's a season of play, so there's field rental, coach wages, equipment, insurance. That's what they do. They've wrapped up any of their competition, any of their training, everything within that. So they can apply as the program is equal to the organization's operations. And this is what the form looks like. So you'll say, how many programs are you requesting funding for? They've entered a 1. And then they've made the selection equal to organization. Again, this is in the tutorial videos too. So if you're not sure, do definitely look at those videos. Example 2, there's one eligible program. So for here we have Sunshine Theatre Society, not-for-profit. Their main program is doing a season of production, right? So this is kind of what they do. It's all of their programming. They have rent, wages, materials, promotion, advertising. This particular theater, though, also rents out their facility to other user groups for about 40% of the time. So it's fairly significant, the amount of time their facility is being rented out, and they earn revenue on that. So we're going to ask them to apply as a distinct program because the facility rentals part isn't something that's eligible for funding. So we'll be looking at getting those costs just based on what their activities are. So any expenses not incurred for the delivery of their eligible programming shouldn't be included. So this is what the application form will look like. They're also selecting one program, and on the drop-down list, they'll select distinct portion. So now the third option, there's multiple programs. Again, this one shows 3 programs. You could have up to 10. The Sunshine Family Services has 3 eligible programs. They're all very different, aimed at different user groups. They may have different program managers, definitely have different program budgets. So each one of these they can apply for separately within the application. And it'll just require separate program descriptions and revenue and expenses for each of those. You can see one is youth and child, one is seniors, and one is a counseling program. So in this example, this is from the new online form. They've entered 4 programs here, and it'll ask you for an overview. So you'll provide the program name, how long it's been operating, and the requested amount. Once you add all of this information in, the next part will open up and it'll ask you for more information about each program. One thing to note, if you do go back and you change this after the fact, the form will dynamically update. So anything that you entered may disappear. So I'd say if you do this, go and save the application. You can go back to previous saves. If you accidentally get rid of something, you can go back to a previous version. So in between the different sections of the application, keep hitting save just to avoid that. But this is a good overview. You get that set, and then you can kind of go through program by program. So that's all I have for program eligibility and how to apply for programs this year. I'm going to talk a little bit about our financial eligibility now. We've got a couple of different policies here. One is at an organizational level, and the other financial criteria is at a program level. Two of our main ones. So at the organizational level, we have a policy called surplus policy. Some people call it the 50% rule. Basically, this is in place to ensure that with limited funding, the grants are going out to the organizations that need funding the most while still remaining viable. So the policy itself is that an organization is temporarily not eligible for grant funding if it has more than 50% of the previous year's expenses on hand as unrestricted funds. So how the grant analyst does this calculation is they'll look at your balance sheet to see what are your current assets and investments. And they're really just looking at cash and investments. They subtract any gaming funds that you may have in there from your last grant, or if you do licensed gaming, they will subtract any of your current liabilities, so accounts payable, typically deferred revenue, if that's clear, and then any internally or externally restricted funds. So they're looking at your balance sheet for that, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like next. And then they divide that by the operating expenses of that, and it's on the same year. So we're always looking at the most recent completed fiscal year. That's what we mean by that previous fiscal year. They divide that by your overall operating expenses, and then times 100 gives us a surplus percentage. So general purpose, contingency, rainy day funds are considered unrestricted. If your organization does have funds that you want to restrict for a specific purpose, just try to make sure that that's clear on the balance sheet and provide minutes of when your board has restricted those funds as well. So that could be for anything. If you're putting a new roof on your building, or maybe your sports team is going to nationals and they don't usually get to go. You want to put aside money for that. Anything that's unusual outside of the usual course of business, we're looking for a motion to restrict it and to see that happened within that same year or before, and that it's reflected on the balance sheet just to make sure it's clear. So here's example financials. And just to show you where they're looking, on the left is a balance sheet. They're looking under current assets to see how much money that you have in the bank, right? So they're looking at this amount. They're not looking at things like capital assets, just cash and investments. And then they'll look down at the current liabilities to see how much to deduct from available funds. One note, I mentioned they will subtract deferred revenues. We do ask for the sources of those deferred revenues to be made clear. That's just to ensure that we're not subtracting gaming funds twice. And we see that often it's included in deferred revenues, or sometimes in a restricted externally restricted. We don't want to remove it twice. We're just trying to be really clear. So that's how they get that figure, what is available, and then they take it and they divide it just here over this. Actually, it'll be over on this side, the total operating expenses, so divided by that number there. So as you see, it's good if it's really clear on the balance sheet what's what. You can have notes if you've got really complicated funds. Definitely have notes to your financials if that's applicable. For the program financial eligibility, this is based on each program that you apply for, and the policy is that government funding can't exceed 75% of the total program cost. So for government funding, we just can include federal and provincial funding. So local, like your local government, your municipalities, your regional districts, that's all considered community funding, not government funding. And so we're just really looking at federal government funding and BC provincial government funding. Remaining 25%, we're looking at coming from community sources. So things like user fees, fundraising, your local government grants, maybe you get a grant and aid. Also in-kind contributions, so like volunteer labor, you can include that, value it, and include it if you want. So this is one reason we might be asking for you to identify program revenue sources. This is an example of a program revenue and expense statement. So they're looking here to see federal. Okay, here's your federal XYZ department. Maybe this is Canada Summer Jobs, right? Provincial ABC, maybe this is your BC Arts Council funding. Here's your community gaming grant funding. So they'll just add up those things that are federal or provincial, and then they divide it over the total program cost down here. So you can see in this example, there is in-kind income. What that does is it inflates the overall expenses. It makes that a larger number, so it changes the ratio. So that can be helpful if you do have a lot of government funding to include the in-kind. It's optional. It's not mandatory. It's handy for things like that, or just to show how much community buy-in you have. So simplified program financials, I've touched on this. It is an option again, it's not mandatory. We're just trying to make things simpler for smaller organizations, really small grassroots groups that are asking for 10,000 or less for all of their programs included, to go through the process of doing separate revenue and expense statements like the one I showed you. What we've heard is that is really difficult for these smaller groups that have less of that capacity. So we've included a simplified program financials that will be available. Again, this is embedded in the new form. So if you're eligible, it'll pop up. It'll say, do you want to use this option? What you need to have ready to know what to put in. What is your total program revenue? So how much money did you have to support the activity? What are your total program expenses? What did it cost you to run it for the last, that same previous fiscal year? Identify any government funding, provincial or federal government funding that did support it, including the source and the amount, and if you have in-kind. Again, that's optional. So it's just going to be fields that you plug numbers into. You don't have to provide a program budget as well if you're asking for less than 10,000. You'll just fill it in and it'll auto-calculate. I mentioned in-kind contributions a few times here. So what we're mainly talking about is volunteer labor. There could be other things too. That's just the most common. Could be, professional services that are offered for free or at a significant, for a lot less funds there. It could be equipment that you've been offered, materials. Maybe somebody's donating goods to you. I know, like for food banks, donated food. their in-kind contributions are higher often than even what their financials are, the amount of donations that they get. So volunteer labor is typically valued at about $20 an hour. Again, if it's a professional service that is worth more than that, listed as a professional service, and show how much it's valued at. Also ask if you include it, as we showed in the program revenues and expenses, listed as a revenue and an expense, so the amounts balance out. It has to equal zero in the end, because otherwise it'll show a false surplus or deficit. And then we'll ask for an in-kind contribution summary. There's an example of that on our website. It's basically telling us how you got at those numbers. So if you said that you had $2,000 in volunteer labor, was that one person working at $20 an hour, or was that, for however many hours, or was that 5 people valued at $20 an hour for less time? What were they doing? Event setup? Just that very general, what is the activity that they're doing? These people here in the image are handing out food. Just provide some information. So prorating, we talked a little bit about if you're applying on a program basis, whether that's one distinct program or several, that you can prorate some of your operational costs to those programs. So these are things like your wages, rent, utilities, if it's directly related to the program delivery. So I'll show you an example here on the next slide. Basically, if you have an employee who spends 40% of their time working on a program that you're getting funded for, then the organization might want to include 40% of that employee's wages as a program expense. So here's an example, again, using that Sunshine Family Services. So they have core organization costs, administration, professional fees, financial management, things like that. They have some non-eligible activities that they do. Maybe they run a fundraising program. Maybe this group has a thrift store that they're running as a social enterprise. So community gaming grants isn't going to fund that. But these 3 programs here, their youth and child program, their seniors outreach, their family counseling, these are programs we're funding. In this example, they've prorated that the director spends an equal amount of time on all 5 activities. So they've portioned 20% of the director's wage to each of the 3 programs you're getting funding for. So up to 60% of what they're doing is eligible for funding and is included. So hopefully that makes some sense. You can do it for other things than just wages. You can do it for if you're renting the facility, your rental costs or your other occupancy costs, heating, internet, all of that. Just a good way to make sure that you get all of those expenses that are being incurred to deliver a program are all included in those program revenues and expenses. And we get a lot of questions about when should I apply? So what do we mean by the most previous fiscal year? And what does that mean for me? So you might want to look at when the intake is and when you should apply. You don't want to apply at the wrong time because you won't be able to have your financials ready. So in this example here, the organization's fiscal year end is the calendar year. They have 3 months after their year end to prepare financials before applying. In this example here, the organization has only 1 day after its fiscal year end to prepare financials before applying. This would probably be pretty difficult, so they should consider applying sooner. So they should apply before their year ends, and then they can actually use the financials from the preceding year. And then in the last example here, This group has 11 months after its fiscal year end to prepare the financials, so they could apply anytime between February 1st and March 30th and use the prior year financials. It's going to be a lot easier for them. So now you've applied, you've got your funding. What next, right? How are you going to spend this grant fund? A lot of people think there's a lot of rules around this. I'll go over it for you, try to simplify it. It's not actually that restricted. So we look at eligible expenses are basically anything that is needed to directly deliver the program, as long as it's not listed specifically as an ineligible cost, and also some of your operating costs. So things like wages of any of your paid positions. That includes contractors, if you have somebody come in temporarily, rent, utilities, insurance, program supplies or office supplies, your internet and phone costs, advertising, marketing, printing. If you need to rent or purchase any kind of specialized equipment for the program, if you need travel within BC, that's essential to the program. Out of province travel is a separate thing. There's another request for that. But any travel within BC that you're doing, any of that. You can also use up to 15% of the total grant received just for overall organizational operating costs. And you can do a transfer to your operating account and list that on your gaming account summary report. Say, we transferred 15% over for operating costs. Other things you can use your grant funds for, you should request this in your application in the use of funds section. Minor capital projects, which are smaller things that you wouldn't apply under the capital project intake for. So these have to have a value under $20,000 to be considered. Could be like smaller facility renovations or accessibility improvements. We see things like maybe a small ramp, maybe they're just upgrading a washroom to put in accessible toilets and grab bars. I think I've seen some daycares who put in like a new cubby system at the front door. It's just a small, it's what it says, a minor capital project. They're doing some kind of a renovation or an upgrade. And also acquisition. So a large one-time purchase, something that's not regular equipment or regular program supplies. It's something a bit out of the ordinary for an acquisition. It could be like IT or audio-visual equipment. Maybe you need some new computers, new furniture, appliances, something like that. That would fall under capital acquisitions. Both of these, whether it's a project or an acquisition, we're looking to see a quote if the value is over $5,000 or if it requires the work of a contractor to do installation. Again, you need to use the regular form application, and it has to be tied to one of the approved programs. You're going to include it within the program request and tell us why that's essential to deliver that program. So that's the other, besides the value part, that's the other kind of difference from the capital project. That is just to support the organization. For these minor capital projects and acquisitions, this is like additional one-time funding, and it's based on if it's available in our budget. We'll try to do it, but it has to really be essential for the program that we're funding. Spending timelines. So once you receive your grant funds, you must spend them within 12 months of receipt. If you need an extension, please do contact us. We're pretty good at providing those extensions. If you're having extenuating circumstances, tell us how long of an extension you need and what the reason is. You can also spend your grant funds, like reimburse, back pay expenses that you've incurred if it's within the same fiscal year the grant is received. So say your fiscal year is the calendar year ending in December and you get your grant in September, you could back pay all the way back to January 1st of that year and forward 12 months. If you are going to back pay expenses that you've previously incurred, you would transfer funds from the gaming account to the general account. You do want to make sure that you've got records of what that was for, so hang on to any receipts or anything so that you can show that you've done that back pay dollar for dollar. You can't pay past debt, so from previous fiscal years, credit card fees, things like that, and you can't pay future costs. So if you know you have something coming up, you can't prepay your rent for 2 years, for example. The cost hasn't been incurred, you can't pay it yet. So grant funds will be deposited into that dedicated gaming account. Best practice, whenever possible, to pay directly from this gaming account. We find it's just easier through helping organizations do their reporting and through input from auditors. If you pay directly from that account, it's really easy to follow up and have a paper trail. When you do transfer it by check or electronically, it has to be for the reimbursement of specific expenses. And again, keep that record dollar for dollar. You have to retain those invoices and receipts for up to 5 years. If you do electronic transfer or EFT, make sure that you have a board that's board approved and you have a document from your board of directors, or at least 2 board of directors, saying what is the maximum amount that you can EFT and for what purposes, just to make sure that there is board control over all of this. And then once a year, you'll do financial reporting. So all gaming grant is reported in what we call gaming account summary report. Internally, we refer to it as a GASR. Organizations that receive gaming grants, or if you've previously received a grant, you still have money in your account, you have to fill in this form. This is based on each applicant's own fiscal year. So once you hit your fiscal year, it triggers it, it becomes due within 90 days. At this time, you will not receive a reminder. We are looking at ways to integrate our new system. So hopefully you'll hear better news from us by this time next year. But for this time right now, there's no reminders coming out. Just include it as part of your regular year-end financials. When you're wrapping up your fiscal year end, this is another thing you have to do. It helps to ensure that grant funding is only being used for eligible expenses. So these get reviewed when they come in by our staff. We do have blank forms and example forms that have been filled out on our website if you need any help with it. And I'll just show you some examples of what they look like and give you kind of a once over. These are older forms that haven't changed in a while. They look a little bit scary like tax forms, but really it's not. A lot of these lines you might not have to fill in. These are also used for licensed gaming, so a lot of it is for that. We're looking for your file number, the date you completed it, and who your organization is. Make sure you fill in that section 1. That has the name of your organization and at least your city. Opening balance should be the same as the closing balance of the previous year. If you're a first-time grant recipient, that'll always be 0. There's places to record your revenue. So community gaming grant, again, there's lines here, so some of these might not be applicable. There's a separate line for PAC grants, a separate line for capital grants. Whole section here is for licensed gaming. If you're getting GST rebates or interest in your account, there's a place to record that. If you're not, don't worry about it. This whole section, again, is for licensed gaming, for prize costs and things like that. If you don't do it, skip it. What we're really looking at here is section 5. We want to see what did you do with your grant funds. So what it's asking you for is a date that you made the payment, some kind of a reference number, check number, EFT, something. Who did you pay, right? Who is it dispersed to? And this one, it says Staples. Purpose was office supplies. So general purpose, so we know what are you doing it for? And then the amount. At the bottom, there's a total gaming fund disbursement. So we're seeing how much came in, how much went out. And then the last 2 pages, there's a closing balance there. And then just a place for you to reconcile that with your actual banking information. So you can put in what is your gaming account bank statement actually say. And if there's a difference there, reconcile that. So sometimes you've written a check and it hasn't cleared yet, would be a good example. Section 8A is for service clubs if they're retaining funds. Section 8B is for that if you're paying out your operating costs. Remember, up to 15% of your grant funds can be retained for organizational operating costs. You just do a transfer. So this is where you would record that. Section 9, community benefit. It's just a short paragraph telling us, you know, statistics are great in here. We use this for our own reporting out to government. So what did you do with the money? How did your community benefit from it? Oh, the money that you gave us helped, you know, send 12 kids to camp. That would be great. And then just sign off from board members, at least 2 directors and whoever prepared the report to sign off that it's all true. That's it. We can help walk you through it. Again, there is example documents too on our website. It's basically just reflecting what happened in your gaming account. I think we're just about there. We just have some more resources and some contacts for you. So to reach out to the branch directly, I've got our website up there. General questions that come in should go to Community Gaming Grants, all one word, at gov.bc.ca. That can include things like if you're requesting an extension to spend your funds, that's the email that you use if you want to request a reconsideration, anything like that. It's our main email. And then the phone number here, this is our phone number in Victoria, is 250-356-1081. You can also call Service BC directly at their 1-800, their toll-free number that they have online. I think it's also on our website. And just let them know you're calling about community gaming grants, and they'll put an agent on who's trained. To reach my team in policy and outreach, we have CGG outreach at gov.bc.ca. And also contact information here for the BC Association for Charitable Gaming, which is Kalina's group. BCACG represents charities and community groups to promote access to gaming revenues. And their website is listed there. And you can reach them by email at gamingquestions@bcacg.com. And last but not least, we also have a wonderful network of community charitable gaming associations throughout the province. They do similar work to the BCACG with offices, you know, geographically spread out through the province. So up in Dawson's Creek, we've got the Northern Lights group, and I've just put their websites down here. I think these slides will be made available as well. Prince George, we have the Northern Interior group, serving Central Okanagan. Oh, I don't have the name there. Central Okanagan Community Charitable Group. And I think they're based out of Kelowna. In Chilliwack, Fraser Valley, CCGA, serving Victoria. And now much of the island actually is Charity Works, based out of Victoria. And for Lower Mainland or anywhere all across BC, of course, the BCACG. I'll just say thank you very much.